Welcome to the Grow Your Law Firm podcast, brought to you by Pilma. This podcast helps lead lawyers to more growth, profit, and freedom. Here is your legal marketing expert and host, Ken Hardison.
Hello, everyone. This is Ken Hardison, and welcome to another episode of Grow Your Law Firm. And today we have the pleasure of having Chad Dudley, the owner or partner in Dudley DeBosier Law Firm down in Louisiana. 180 people. And I remember when you were about 30, and you have really done some great things with that. And also, he's an entrepreneur, and he owns CJ Advertising, which does TV and all kinds of advertising and marketing for lawyers across the nation. So welcome to the show, Chad.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me. I always enjoy working with you, Ken, and also attending the Pilma conferences and reading the materials. And so it's an honor to be part of this today.
So Chad is very humble, but he is a thought leader. He is an entrepreneur. He is genius when it comes to management and marketing law firms. And he's a frequent speaker at our Super Summit, which we're having this year in New Orleans, September 29th through October the 2nd. And we couldn't do it last year because of COVID, but we're happy. Always love it when we can get you to, to speak, because it's always insightful, and everybody, the room fills up when you go to speak. So we're looking forward to having you there, Chad. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I always enjoy speaking at those meetings, and we got a lot of people that are always just, the conference attracts a lot of groups that are eager to improve their firm. They're eager to make their firm better, and that's always an easy audience to speak to.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to get right into the meat of it, because I want to, a lot of good things. Some of these questions I've been saving just for you. Like, you're big on metrics, or KPIs, whatever you want to call them. What do you think, like the top 5 or 7 that every law firm owner should really be looking at, and how often?
Well, I did consulting for 10, 11 years. I started Vista Consulting with Tim Mackey. Tim Mackey, runs it completely now. I got out when we purchased CJ Advertising back in 2018, and so that I didn't have enough time to do both. But during those years that I did consulting, I probably worked with maybe 100 plus plaintiff personal injury firms from plaintiff firms from all across the country, all different sizes, 2, 3, 4 people to 200 people, one attorney to over 100 attorneys, and everything in between. And you see some common elements of things that make law firms or make plaintiff firms tick. And so now, I'll work with 1 or 2 firms a year now. And what I do now is what I did back when I was doing consulting is we start with looking at a law firm and go, okay, let's look at their P&Ls and see, are there patterns, what percentage of their revenue do they spend on advertising? What percent is spent on labor? What percent is spent on other stuff? Do they have a high labor ratio and in relation to the revenue produced? What's the revenue per attorney? Is it, if their expenses are off, is it because the attorneys are producing lower than average amounts per attorney, or is it because they just have a bunch of crazy expenses? And we'll break that kind of down. So that when I say P&L, that's one. We look at a bunch of different ways for firms that are maybe mass tort firms or different types of firms. We'll look at 3 to 5 to 7 years of P&Ls and see what patterns are there, because if you look at 3 years for a mass tort firm, you can see these big spikes in revenue and these feast or famine type things. And so you got to look at a wider range. And so when I break down to assessment, P&L is one. The second thing is I like to break that P&L down by what I would call a fee center. So if the firm's making money, is it making money across each fee center, which is a fee center could be attorneys. How much are you profitable by each attorney? Are you profitable by each location? Are you profitable by each practice area or case type? And we look at those kind of things. So, number one is P&L. The second one is a fee center analysis. The third one I would call a pipeline analysis. And we'll look at a report that goes, okay, this is how do cases flow through your firm? What do you spend on advertising? Out of that, how many leads do you get per case type? Of those, how many are qualified leads that you want to sign up? Of those, how many do you actually convert to contract? And then based on that, what percent do you typically close with a fee? And what's your average closed fee, right? and what's your average time on desk. And we look at, and it shows you just kind of how cases flow through your office. And so that's another one that we use to assess the efficiency of the firm. The fourth thing is what I call the Pareto point analysis, which is most law firms in their core case types, auto, personal injury, the big ones, med mal, nursing home, 20% of their cases generate 80% of their revenue. 5% of their cases generate 50% of your revenue. The bottom 20% of their cases only generate 1% to 2% of their revenue. And so understanding where those things are true for each law firm and each case type tells you a lot about the firm. And you kind of understand how, okay, is this a firm that handles a small number of cases with a really high average fee? And what does that look like? That's different than a firm that handles lots of cases with lower average fees. And you kind of understand a lot by looking at those, I call them Pareto points, right? And that's something else we look at. And then finally, we'll just look at the intake patterns over, a 5-year period and see, okay, is there a consistent intake, increases, decreases, et cetera? And so we use those 5 tools to assess how healthy a firm is. Once you get past that and you kind of pick spots where a firm should focus their energies on and improving, what is the things that they can do to become healthier, become more productive, then you get into the actual running of a firm. And in that area, there's, at the core of reports, I say, look, there's what I call an intake summary report, a fee report, a closed case report. Those are the big ones. There's a marketing report that's pretty general, but it's a variation of the intake summary report. Those core reports, you can do a lot with those. And then in terms of case management, there's 2 reports. One is what I call a case listing report, and the other one's called a case details report. But that's not a bunch. Like, a lot of firms have got every single report under the sun. You don't need a ton to run your firm efficiently. Right. And I always say firms start with those. Like that's 1, 2, 3, that's five key reports, right? And we can talk about the details of those, but those are the areas that they cover.
Well, I do want to ask you one thing. So because you work with over 100 law firms, what do you consider healthy? How much a fees each lawyer at a PI firm should generate?
When we look at firms, we go, okay, how many fee producing attorneys do you have in the firm? And by fee producing, I mean, okay, you might have 10 attorneys, but you got one that works in intake, and you got one that, is a brief writer, and you got one that does whatever. Set those guys aside and focus on what are your fee producing attorneys. I think at a minimum, you're wanting at least $800,000 in revenue per year out of those guys. It's not uncommon to get in the million range per attorney per year. A really healthy firm gets in that 1.2 range. And then but that's not to say, like, you got some firms out there that are, I've seen firms get as high as, 2 million, 2.2 million, an attorney on average. And that's, so it's doable, but most of the time you see the firms live in that $900,000, $1 million, 1.2 range. And
I remember Big Cochran, the guy I sold out to, his 3rd year out of law school, he was an associate, and he was doing nothing but workers' comp, and he was doing 7 figures to start with. But his 3rd year, he did 2.5 million in workers' comp fees, and my partner says, well, we pay commission, and ACC said, well, we got to pay. I said, I don't mind it a bit. I said, so at 2.5, I don't mind paying him $300,000 or $400,000 because look how much he made me. I mean, or us. I mean, the deal is
absolutely right.
Yeah.
And gosh, there's so much that goes into it, right? Because you work with these firms, and all the pieces go together, right? And you got to be really careful about grabbing one element of it and going like, hey, I'm good. Because talking to a firm the other day, and their average revenue per attorney was like 1.2. So that sounds good. But then they had extremely high case counts, 300-400 cases per. And so what you see in that is like, okay, they're probably overloaded. So let's check time on desk. Let's check what I would call the rate. The rate is taking the their average fee over a time period and divide it by average time on desks to get that fee. And it gives you a rate. And what that effectively measures, okay, that's great that you got, maybe you got $100,000 result. If it took you 24 months to get that result and it took someone else 12 months to get the same result, their rate is going to be twice as good. And it's an indicator. I like rates that are $800 or more per month. You can get much higher rates than that, obviously. And look, these are averages. Do firms have attorneys where they generate 3, 4, million, 5 million plus by themselves? Yes, absolutely. I'm talking about an average across the firm. If you get past that million, 2 million, you're doing pretty good.
So when you say rate, can you go back over that? Because I want to make sure I understand that. So you take the time on desk.
Time on desk in months, right? And then, so you take a fee that you earned on a case. Say you earned a $25,000 fee on a case, and it took you 12 months to get there. Take the $25,000, divide it by the 12, and that's your rate. That's like basically how much did that case earn you for every month you had it in your possession.
Gotcha.
Attorneys that don't add value to their case and take a longer amount of time to get to the end result, they're going to have lower rates. And so if you run, when we're talking about one of the key reports, the closed case report, is like, okay, for any given date range, show by attorney, how many cases did they close, right? How many of those closed with a fee? Then their closed with fee percentage. What were their total fees on those closed cases? Their average closed fee, and then their average time on desk for those closed cases, and then their rate, right? Now you also on that report, you have the time on desk for the closed no fee cases. Let's set that aside there for a second because that's important as well. But if you talk about the rate, you'll see your attorneys that have low rates, like in the 200, 300, 400, like they're letting cases sit. They're not moving them. They're not pushing them. And look, a lot of the stuff is where you should look. And that's an indicator. Go find out what's going on there. Is it always the case that they're, dragging feet? Not always, but a lot of the time. And that's an easy way to spot it.
Yeah, I mean, all these reports and things, they're just flags. You got to dig in. They're like flags that come up for you. And then you got to go dig in and figure out, is this guy lazy or has he got 400 cases and he just can't get to everything, and he's handling the ones to the clients that are yelling the hardest,
Correct.
That does happen sometimes. I mean, I've seen it.
So correct. So like the firm that I was just talking about that has 300 or 400 files per attorney. Now their fees that they're generating, it's 1.2, 1.3, and like, okay, that's not bad. But you could probably hire 3 or 4 more attorneys for that firm, and they'd all produce 900,000, $1 million. I mean, and so there's a bottleneck, and you got to dig and go, okay, well, just because I have a bunch of cases doesn't mean that I'm automatically going to produce a bunch of fees. And so my guess is, check the rate. The other thing that is an indicator of what I would call like a settlement mill, which none of us want to be, is when you look at your Pareto point, right? A healthy firm, usually like the top 20% of their cases generate 80% of the revenue. In a classic indicator of a settlement mill is that the top 20% of their cases only produce 55% of the revenue, 60% of the revenue. Meaning like the more all the cases get treated the same, that Pareto point number sort of becomes dissipates, right?
Right.
And so these are all indicators. You can see like, high case counts typically have a lot of other adverse effects. Lower number of referrals, longer time on desk, lower rate, lower average fee, bad review. There's a lot of bad stuff that comes out of high case counts, and so I'm not a fan of them.
Yeah, I never was either. In fact, well, I think it takes away from client service, which I was, when I had my firm, that was like my number one deal. I mean, I never promised I could get you the most money, but I promised that you would be, you got to call, somebody would talk to you and answer your questions and keep you informed, and we do the best we could. But I mean, that was not up there holding a lot of, checks and stuff. That just wasn't my style, but I had to be different. And I wasn't the greatest trial lawyer. I mean, I was okay. I tried probably 150 cases in my life, but there was so many better trial lawyers than me. And I know that, and I knew that, so I didn't try to differentiate myself doing that. But
and so some wise person told me early on, going, a lot of our clients they don't know how well we wrote that brief, how well we argued their case, how well we tried their case, how well we took apart that defendant in the deposition, but they do know how to judge us on how kind we were, how we treated them, how we made them feel. And so you got to do both, right? You got to strive for excellence and be master your profession, but you also need to be good, treat them right. It's just the right thing to do. And, that's what they'll remember. And on the other side of this, you get a lot of people probably ask you, and they ask me, and they go, well, how many cases should each attorney have? And it depends. One, what are you trying to do on the case, right? If you're trying to call your clients every 15 days and you're trying to touch the file, and do a file review to determine what you got to do to add value, to get a trial date, or to bring the case to a resolution, then that's less cases. You can handle 500 cases poorly. I mean, I don't know define what it means to handle them. The other thing is, when I did consulting for firms that I call them low volume, high value firms, right? These maybe boutique firms.
Yeah.
They don't do mass advertising, but they very selective about cases, usually get them from other law firms. And those guys might handle 15 cases. They're all monster cases with crazy liability issues, but that's their model, right? And so for them, 15 might be too many. And then, you got other firms that, okay, we're only going to handle, this guy's only going to handle rear end cases with, certain level of injuries, and you can handle more of those, but you still don't want to handle too many.
Yeah.
And,
I agree with you. So you said something like that I want to follow up on, and we'll change gears, but I do want to know, I want to compare notes with you. So what do you see out there as the average percentage spent on labor and in that on advertising?
We call it, so you got attorney comp, non-attorney comp. And when we talk about comp, we're talking about all-in comp, right? All-in is base, commission, discretion, bonuses, discretionary bonuses, benefits, taxes, whatever, right? All-in compensation. And I'll throw out some general numbers, but every time I do, I get these firms that go, we're way better than that, or we're that doesn't apply to us, or they're all over the place. And I get that, right? But if you want some general guidelines, you got to break it down into those expenses: non-attorney comp, attorney comp, and then advertising. Advertising, typically, if you're a firm that's doing what I call mass advertising, you're on TV, PPC, buying leads, not getting the bulk of your business from attorney referrals, then you're typically spending somewhere between 15% to maybe 20% of your revenue on advertising. There's firms that are going into a new market, trying to grow aggressively. They might creep up to 25%, maybe sometimes even a little bit higher than that of revenue for some period of time. And then on the labor side, usually it's somewhere between the ballpark of 40% of your revenue or less typically goes to labor. Now I've seen firms way below that. And look, when you have the smaller your firm, the more volatile these numbers can be. You have a small firm, they get a big hit, blows these ratios out of the water. Like, all right, that's great. Well, that's awesome. That's the firm where you're like, okay, let's look at this for a 7-year period. Do you get that big hit every year? I feel more comfortable planning around that if that's the case. If you only get this hit once every 7 years, then let's plan around that. But the labor ratios, 40%, 37.5% or below revenue is in a decent range. If you add those, I call them the big three. If you add those three together, you're looking at advertising, non-attorney comp, attorney comp. If you're around 60% of revenue or less, that's healthy. Again, these are very, very general. Each firm's a little different. And when we're looking at those numbers, let's take, if there's partners that are in the business, right?
Right.
We typically, during this analysis, we'll take what we call their artificial compensation and set to the side. And by artificial compensation, I mean, if you have a firm and it's got 10 attorneys and 6 are partners, and all 6 partners are working their butt off in the business, and they're treating all their income as distributions, the labor ratio is going to look artificially low, because we're only paying 2 guys or whatever, 4 guys to work, and the rest is revenue. I'm like, nah, that's not a good picture. Let's treat it. If you were to replace those 6 partners from the marketplace, what would you pay someone to fill those spots? And we treat that as artificial sort of compensation, so you can get a clear picture of the labor ratio of that firm, right? And so when I'm working with a firm, I'll look at their labor ratio, and if you're picking your battles of where you can make the biggest impact. And if they got a labor ratio that's in the 50% range, or okay, let's go attack this. If they got a labor ratio that's in the 30%, 35% range, we're like, okay, let's move on to something else. And when you're looking at the labor ratio, it's very important to look at the revenue per attorney number, because if you got a firm that's got $600,000 revenue per fee producing attorney, the labor ratio is going to be out of whack. But it's a revenue problem. It's not a, Like the actual amount you're paying might be okay. The attorneys aren't producing enough to support the structure you created. Now, if the labor ratio is off and the revenue per attorney is in the $900,000 $1 million range, you're like, okay, those guys are doing what they need to do on the top line. Let's go talk about what's happening below in the expenses.
Right. All right. Well, I want to change gears. That was fascinating. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
So, non-lawyer ownership of law firms.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to know what your take is on it. I mean, are you worried about it? Are you welcome it?
Well, it's like, what's your take on the wind? I mean, it's going to blow where it wants to go, and you got to adapt your sales to it. I think right now we're lucky in the sense that as lawyers, we're competing in a bubble, right? We're competing in a bubble, and natural predators are not allowed into this bubble. And what I mean by that is, most things you read, it says when an industry gets to 15% or higher net profit across the board, right, it attracts competition, and they come in and beat it down until it gets back down to 15% or below. And that doesn't happen in our industry because there's a bubble. It keeps a lot of competitors out, right? And we just got to realize that and so we got to the fact that we're winning, so to speak, or that we're doing well as a firm does not mean that doesn't mean that you can't improve. And that's one of the biggest dangers I see with firms, is that they're like, hey, I'm doing well, it's going, but it causes them to be complacent and not address some really dangerous things that are existing in their firm, right?
Right.
And you see it all the time. And so I said, like, you got to stay vigilant. You got to push yourself to say, okay, how can I keep getting better? And so to answer your question, going, okay, well, do I think the non-lawyer ownership of firms is going to happen? It absolutely is. It's starting to happen in different states right now, right? They're experimenting with it. They're going to see where it's going to go.
Yeah.
And so, okay, well, is it going to happen next year, next week? Well, who knows? It's hard, but it's going to happen. And so does that change your strategy? Not terribly, because the things that you'd want to do to be in a good position if that were to occur are the same things that you'd want to do to make your firm better, right? I mean, systems and processes and not person driven, but systems driven, right? And going like, okay, are there meetings at your firm that if you don't attend, they don't happen, right? Well, that's person driven. If they happen whether you're there or not, that's systems driven, right? That's healthier. Things that are all dependent on one owner's personality or productivity, or those are like that in any other industry, those are less attractive acquisitions, right? And so should it happen where there's the non-lawyer ownership of firms, you're going to see a bunch of new money come in. You see a lot more competition. And I think a lot of acquisitions where they're going to look for firms that are well run from a system standpoint.
Yeah, I agree. I did a lot of research on this back when they had the lawsuits going on several years ago.
Mhm.
And they did it in Australia, and they did it over in the UK, and maybe 15, 17% of the law firms are owned by non-lawyers. I mean, it's not that big a deal, and they've been doing it for 15 years.
Mhm.
I'm not worried about it, to be honest with you. I think just like you said, there's always competition. My gosh, I mean, but if you build it right, I mean, you want to be building it to compete. I don't care who it is. If it's Martians, I mean, the deal is you're building it to win and to give great client service and to get your profit margin. Which brings me to a question I forgot to ask you a while ago. What do you think is healthy for a PI law firm as far as profit margin? 20, 25, 30, 35?
Yeah, I mean, I think a good benchmark is 25%. I mean, like, you're going like, okay, what are, if you're taking the pulse of a personal injury firms, what are some of the things that are like indicators of health? You're like, well, okay, consistent 25% net profit or higher. And again, I know there's a lot of firms that are way above that number, but if you're a sizable firm and getting that 25, 30% profitability is healthy, and then you're looking at, okay, well, other indicators are, I like firms that don't carry operational debt, right? I like firms that have access to either cash or some type of vehicle to fund maybe 3 to 6 months of what I call non-discretionary expenses, like things you can't turn off overnight. There's things
Right.
you can, there's things you can't, but give yourself some cushion and there's a bunch of different vehicles to make that happen. And so, I like firms with healthy ratios that, sometimes you'll see a firm that might have, really efficient advertising ratio. Like maybe they're 7% of revenue goes to advertising. They're kicking butt and they're growing, and their labor ratio is 53%. So combine those at 60. But you got their efficiency in advertising is covering up their inefficiency in labor. So
Right.
I like to see the ratios all kind of healthy across the board, as opposed to one's carrying the inefficiency of the other. The revenue per attorney, I like, there's a couple different metrics where you're like, okay, we're taking the temperature, but those are the ones that stand out.
So we get it. I do a lot of masterminding. I got like 5 masterminds at Pilma, and one thing that we always we get into this argument, and it's we'll have one side saying you got to track everything, use CallRail, do this, Then we got other lawyers say, well, I spend so much money on advertising. They said, there's no way in hell that I can track it because I'm everywhere. I'm on billboards, I'm on buses, I'm on TV, I'm on radio. I mean, how do I know? I'm on Facebook, I'm on social media. I mean, I'm everywhere. They might have called me off the phone number that's tracked on my website, but really they saw the billboard and the TV ad and then heard me on the radio driving home and decided to pick up the phone and call me. But they want to, but they want to check me out first. I mean, what's your take on it?
Well, yeah,
you run an advertising agency. I mean,
Yeah. And so, the question is, well, how do I know it's working, right? And so
Yeah.
at the very broadest level, you go, what is my advertising to revenue ratio?
Yeah.
If you're spending 50% of your revenue on advertising, I would argue it's not working. Something's not working, right? If you're spending 5% of your revenue on advertising and you're growing and it's working great, right? And so you start there and go, okay, what's that advertising to revenue ratio? That gives you some idea of how it's going, right? And I know that's very vague, but that's where you start. Then after that, you go, well, let's take the case types that that the firm generates revenue on: auto, general PI, workers' comp, maybe it's social security disability, maybe it's mass torts, maybe it's whatever it is. Take those case types and go, all right, well, and this is kind of like where the pipeline analysis comes into play. You're like, well, if I take my advertising, what's my advertising to revenue ratio for each of those case types? And then, and that's where it can get a little bit complex, but just you can make sense of it by going, okay, well, look, look for a 1 year time period and go, what do we spend on advertising? Okay, let's take our general advertising. Is there any case specific stuff that we're going to back out, like mass torts? Hey, these ads were for workers' comp only. Let's set that aside. These ads were for Social Security only. Okay, set that aside. We bought some leads for this case. All right, set that aside. Okay, here's your general advertising budget. When you advertise for auto, you know that it generates some PI and you know it generates some workers' comp. So you kind of you allocate it a little bit arbitrarily, but in a way, it's got to make sense. And you go, okay, here's basically ballpark what I spent on auto ads, the general plus the specific advertising for those things. And I got this many leads, these many qualified leads. And most importantly, this is what these cases are worth to me. So if your average fee is $25,000, you can afford to spend more to get that case in the door than a firm whose average fee is $5,000, right? And so when those two firms come to me and go, what should I spend for a case? I said, well, it's different for you than it is for them, right? And so you got to take that into play. And what you're trying to beat is, you got to make your numbers work. If you are spending, if your average fee is 25 grand, you got a little bit more money to spend, and your win and loss as to what your marketing is doing is going to look a little bit differently. And so you kind of you go down that path. And then once you kind of look at what you're willing to spend per case type to get those in the door, then you go, okay, well, all right, am I doing that? Am I getting those in the door for that amount? And look, if you're a firm that gets cases through referral sources, you do the same thing, but you set those aside and go, okay, let's look at our referral sources. We got this many in, this is a revenue, this is what we paid out referral fees, co-counsel fees. Does it work, right? Same analysis, just a little bit different. And so you're doing this, and then you're breaking up, well, let's break up the channels and see if we can give any attribution to certain channels and see if that produced cases at an efficient rate. Now, this is where it gets into a mess, because what you call last touch attribution.
Yeah.
And you got objective last touch attribution means it got coded to that source without anybody touching it. Like call rail came in, it dumped it into your system, and it said, this is the last thing this person did before they communicated with you via chat, via form submission, via phone call. They looked at this Google ad, they, saw this, whatever, social media what. Objective last touch attribution gives you some clean stuff. Sort of subjective last touch is kind of like, you're going like, well, they told you the last thing they did, right? And sometimes that gets a little funky. Then there's like asking the client, right? So let's stop there. Objective last touch is still going to lead you down some weird paths, because that sometimes weighs heavier to stuff like PPC, right? Because that's typically, the last thing they do, in the sense of, if they're looking for a number, that will get weighted heavy. Like they'll see the ad, they'll sometimes search it online, they end up, that last touch will give credit to PPC in that situation, right? And that happens a lot. And I'm not saying all the time, but you can see PPC last touch cannibalize other sources in terms of credit. So then you got this other idea going, well, what if we do this? What if we do like some type of holistic attribution and say, we'll do last touch. We'll ask the client why, what made them call us. We'll give priority to these answers. If they say I was referred by a friend or family, and they say TV, we'll put it down as TV, or put it down as referred by friend and family. And, we might do some cool stuff with, we're going to watermark our commercials and connect that with what time the call comes in. And if it comes in with 6 minutes, we're going to give credit to the TV, and we'll give 50% credit to TV. We're going to give 20% to the friend that referred them, and we're going to give whatever 30% to whatever they touched last, right? And it gets complicated, right?
Yeah.
But and so you can go down those paths. We have been down a lot of these paths, and you see a lot of this. And this is why it brings up going, okay, well, they'll see your ad on TV. They will then speak into the phone, go, hey, Dudley DeBosier, whatever firm they're looking for. They'll call that number, right? And then they'll tell you that a friend referred them. Like we got the data showing that's how it happens, right? And then you start going into the data, which is interesting. And one of your questions is, well, where is artificial intelligence going to hit our industry first? It's going to be here in advertising before case management. I'll tell you why later. But the reason is that that's what's somewhat flat data in the sense that, like, you're not going through multiple steps of what they did. And what you're seeing, there's programs out there because Amazon uses it, other companies use it. They can see every time you engage with their online properties. So you went there once to go check this out. You went there a second time to check this out. You went a third time to check this out, right? But it wasn't until the sixth time that you actually did something on their site. Well, they can see all those interactions with their brand, right? And there's software that allows you to do that with your brand, but it is a ton of data but it's there to see, okay, this person went to your YouTube channel, watched this, then they went to your Facebook thing, watched this, then they went over to here, did this, and then they went to your site and submitted a form, and then they became a client. That's where the data gets really, it's no longer flat, right? It's starting to get deep. That's tough to analyze in bulk. And that's where, you want to, okay, all right, AI, take it. And then you go, okay, well, you know what? And I think what we'll find at some point is like, well, social media is tough to give credit to in terms of attribution, but we're going to see that maybe, people engage with your brand a lot more on social and then go over, 6 months after they get some comfort because you did these things. And it's a little bit conjecture. We see some things that indicate stuff like that, but that's where AI, I think, will hit first.
Yeah, because that was going to be, I was going to ask you, where do you see automation and artificial intelligence being used? So
yeah, because, AI, I had a bunch of, a ton. For me, it's a ton because it's just, it seems like a lot of like 5-6 companies come out and, hey, we got this AI platform and want to, we heard, you're the guy to talk to and got, some data, and let's talk about, we want to find some predictors. What's a predictor of a good case? What's a predictor of a trouble, bad client? What's a predictor of all this stuff? And so we're going to turn our AI loose on it and work with us. And the reason why I think the biggest barrier in that stuff is the quality of the attorney. They don't have a way to plug that in and go, all right, we gave this fact pattern to a mediocre attorney, and we gave this same fact pattern to a great attorney. And in their AI, it was difficult for the ones I worked with to account for that. And it's a huge factor. It's a big factor.
Absolutely. I agree with you. So we're running out of time, but I did want to ask you this because, you've been doing TV for years. I did TV for years, and you own an advertising company, and you create ads and run ads for lawyers all across the country. But really, where do you see TV going the next 5 to 10 years? Because here's what I'm hearing, and I'm sure you're hearing the same thing, Chad. TV still works, but the cost per case is rising. And it reminds me of what was happening to the Yellow Pages. I pulled out of Yellow Pages in like 2005. I was one of the first lawyers to pull out because I was tracking my, I had all these tracking numbers, and the case went from $500 to where it was costing me $2,500, and my average fee was only $7,500. And I just didn't think that was a good return. I mean, I felt like, I need to be getting my cases for at least under $1,000. I quit it, went cold turkey. Do you think that's going to happen to TV, or what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, and look, when we're talking about TV, define, okay, what do you mean by TV, and do you mean screens, or do you mean traditional TV?
I'm talking about traditional TV, and I think, and then we could talk about the streaming stuff too. I mean,
I think, look, right now, I still believe that TV is the best way to build a brand. I think it's a great way to get the word out. Now, it's going to change rapidly, and I think that we're already seeing that, and I think you need to complement building your brand with other avenues and other mediums, right? And I think great comparison to Yellow Pages in the sense, like, okay, when Yellow Pages started to go on the decline, you saw different strategies for how firms handled that, right? Some firms pretended it didn't exist, and they kept buying double trucks till until they absolutely just stopped printing yellow pages. You had other firms that said, we don't know when or how or to what extent, we're just out altogether, out 100% cold turkey, right? And then you had the firms that were very disciplined about, like what you did, tracking numbers and managing it and making data-driven decisions about what to change and how much over what time period. And those guys had some really good years in the sense that, like, these guys got out, these guys were overspending, and you got some really efficient years by being disciplined when everyone was kind of freaking out a little bit. I think with TV, what you're going to see is the same thing. Like all the things we just talked about are going to be increasingly important to be aware of and in tune with and watching. And it's going to be different for each market, right? There's markets that are much more aggressive about adopting other ways to hire an attorney than different markets, right? And it depends on where you are, depends on, the culture of where you live. And I think you take all those factors, but right now it's still the main way to build a brand. And so when we're working with firms, we look at, okay, what's their dynamic, what's their market, and use the tools that we think will best serve that market. It's a mix of a bunch of different mediums, but TV is still a core part of that recommendation.
And so how about stuff like this OTT?
I think the cool thing with OTT and all this online platforms is that it's going to be so much easier to track, right? Like it's going to be way easier. The data that's going to be available, that will be great. And so you're going to see this divide of the firms that take advantage of that and the firms that don't, right? The firms that take advantage it's going to be fantastic. It's going to be great. You'll be able to tell exactly what came from where.
Would you encourage law firms to spend part of their marketing budget on OTT this time?
Right now, it's funny. It's OTT. If you remember, like PPC, like in the early days of PPC, it wasn't great for core case types. It was better for weird stuff like lemon law or maybe a nursing home case or and then mass torts. And then you can't get auto, you can't get general PI, you can't. It's just really expensive. No one's really doing it. And then all of a sudden you got this. It reached critical mass, and all of a sudden everyone's putting more dollars towards that. I think you're going to see some similar things in OTT where, the early adopters right now are probably getting beat up a good bit in that medium. Does that mean don't do it? No, because you kind of want to learn the ropes a little bit. You want to understand the dynamic. I think it's eventually going to get much stronger. Just when, how quick, who knows? But I think intellectually we all go, okay, that makes sense that those guys that are watching the Netflix and Hulu and all these other streaming platforms and are going to that's where we got to advertise, where the eyeballs are.
Well, listen, it's been great. We've run out of time. How can if you want people to contact you, I know you're busy, but at least contact your advertising company or whatever.
No, absolutely. No, please. I love, engaging with people and hearing about, what's going on in their world and their firm. See Dudley, Dudley, at DudleyDeBosier.com. And drop me a line.
Listen, it's been great, man. It really, I appreciate you taking time. I know you're busy, but you got a wealth of knowledge up there, and hell, you've taught me some stuff today. So thanks.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Yes, sir. Until next time, this is Ken Hardison, dedicated to your success.
You have been listening to the Grow Your Law Firm podcast, the podcast that leads lawyers to more growth, profit, and freedom. Go to growyourlawfirm.com to find more ways to market and manage your law firm. Please leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to your podcasts.